From Futuresource Consulting, Carl Hibbert is going to give us a market review across VR, AR, and mixed reality, and I believe worldwide. So in 20 minutes, over to you, Carl.
20 minutes, yeah. Thanks very much, Will. Thank you. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and also thank you very much for VR World Congress as well for the invitation to talk today. So yeah, my name's Carl Hibbert. I head up the research division at Futuresource, which is an independent market research and strategy consulting firm based here in the UK. And I head up the entertainment team, so we're spanning all forms of entertainment across music, video, TV, and games. So as you can imagine, VR has almost fallen into our remit, almost by default really, given the applications of VR and how it sits across all those divisions as well. I think VR is probably one of those more challenging areas we've worked in over the last few years. I think some of the other technologies, some of the other media consumption models we've looked at have been relatively straightforward. It's measurement of broadband homes, it's have they got the right content, and if so, tick the box, and typically away you go. Whereas I think with VR, what we've tried to do is, we're not saying, in 5 years' time we'll put our money in and say that 100% accuracy our data is correct. But what we've tried to do is, when we're actually looking at modelling and forecasting, we've tried to get a sensible, a realistic approach, and really looking at, I suppose, almost like the grand ecosystem of VR, excuse me, and also AR and MR as well, and how that interacts as well, and just put those, I suppose, those markers in place and apply some rules and also some variables as well, just to make sure that really we're on the right roadmap for these. So I want to share some of these ideas and thoughts with you today. So I work for Futuresource, but I think, when we're looking into the future, but really I think it's important to really look in the history, and the short-term history here now, and look at how we finished 2016 from a data perspective in the consumer sector. In terms of headsets then, if you exclude cardboard because of, I suppose the implications of the freebie of the gifting, the fact that I think it was Sweden's McDonald's gave them away with every Happy Meal, you can get to tens of millions very, very quickly. But in terms of actively purchased, actively subsidized and bundled headsets, then it was around about 5.2 million mark, and that's across both mobile and tethered. When you look at games, and I think we've already touched on it early today, which is games has really been, I suppose, really the early money spinner on the VR front. And at the end of 2016, that was around about 35 million US dollars. And when you then look at the video, and we're also including advertising, so I suppose the pre-rolls, which take place on YouTube as well, then we're looking at a really small market still at the end of 2016. Still very much in the experimentation phase, still very much in the free to view platform. So these numbers are a great start point. As I say, we're still really in the first 18 months of the market when we finished 2016 as well. But what I want to really do is really put that into perspective and look at the overall addressable market for VR, and also look at the potential. So if we're looking at, as we've seen in some of the other presentations today, with regards to 5-year, 10-year, 15-year projections, Richard got very enthusiastic about looking into the future and how the VR world will shape. Then we've got a massive addressable market to hit here, massive amount of potential revenue opportunities which can be driven here. I'm not going to go through a massive amount of detail. You can probably read for yourself on the data here as well. But what I want to indicate really is we're really at really year dot on VR. As I say, it's the first generation headsets that's still in the marketplace. From a content perspective, people are still trying to find out what works, and importantly what doesn't work, and not make the same mistakes again. But I think given the right investment, given the ongoing commitment from not just the hardware guys, but also importantly content producers, games publishers, and I suppose really the wider tech industry, then I think really we can start to, maybe if I'm stood here in 5 years' time, we can start to populate these charts with a bit more orange than green in the perspective. On the Hollywood infographic there, I wasn't too sure how to illustrate video, so I thought that was probably the best indication to give, and you can probably see a small orange dot there, which is used because we were working at less than 1% of home video spend was on VR video content. As part of my remit as well, I suppose our core methodology at Futuresource is is industry research. So we're speaking with many companies, associations, etc. But what we also do as well is complement that industry research with twice yearly consumer research programs across 12 markets across the world. And given it sits within my team, which is focused on entertainment, as you can imagine, very heavily focused on video consumption, entertainment trends, and device usage. So what we've done for the last 2 years now is take a marker every 6 months as to where awareness levels and also trial levels are with consumers and VR. Now, I've typically in the past actually shown awareness of VR, but I think it's quite misleading because most people have heard of VR, but then most people have probably watched Star Trek. But I think actually understanding the principles of what really VR means in this day and age now, with the likes of the Cardboard, Daydream, Vive, etc. as well, I think it's almost a bit misleading to ask a typical consumer what that means. So really what we wanted to draw down is who's actually tried this as well, and importantly, and I think critically as well, is that what we are seeing half year on half year is that the usage levels are beginning to increase. And when we last dipped our toe in the water onto this at end of December, then it was the mobile Gear VR which came out trumps. Quite surprisingly, PlayStation VR was actually up at the second spot. But when you actually look at our survey sample, nationally representative but online, then it does potentially maybe skew to maybe a more higher tech audience. So that's always something we have to bear in mind when we take this litmus test. So I suppose really what we often ask for immediately when we talk about really on VR is the numbers. We can talk about the theory, we can talk about the prohibitors and the catalyst to growth, but what we really want to really share with you today is the overall numbers on the marketplace. So by the time we're at 2021 on a global scale, and this is annual volume both across mobile, inclusive as well of all-in-one headsets and also tethered as well, we're looking at over 90 million units shipped per annum on a global scale. And then when you actually start then to relay that back in terms of where all these devices are being sold, where they're sitting and where they're actually being used, then North America and Western Europe are obviously very key markets. We see a lot of content coming from those markets as well. But I'm sure you're all very much aware of how quickly places like China, places like South Korea are taking off with VR in public forums, cafes, gaming cafes, Tencent rolling out multiple games for the platform. And just when you actually look at, I suppose, really the numbers on VR, and I suppose really that what's really going to make VR tick, one of the things being mobile, when you look at the numbers which China Telecom, China Mobile are reporting, of hundreds of millions of mobile subscribers, all it takes is one of those guys to start bundling headsets, and before you know it, you've hit numbers way beyond the stratosphere here as well. So I think we think APAC will be a major market on the headset market moving forward. As I mentioned before, I think, as I say, VR, it crosses a number of the industries we're looking at and also wider than some of the sectors we're looking at as well. So I think one of the key benchmarks we've actually used is how quickly have other technologies, quite innovative technologies as well, we're not necessarily looking at the desktop PC, for example, in terms of benchmarking, but some of these innovations, quite often coming out of Silicon Valley, have driven. The smartwatch being a great example. When you look at the kicker there, that was the launch of the Apple Watch. But we're actually still looking at very much a niche platform there, and a niche technology with quite niche applications. When you look at the tablet from a contrasting perspective, then you see the complete opposite. We're looking at a very quick mass market product for tablets. So really VR sits somewhere in between. From the tablet perspective, it already had, almost by day one, applications ready to go. VR, much of the industry is still trying to find its feet as to exactly what works and what doesn't. And smartwatches, in many markets now, they're actually niche and almost a bit of a nice to have, not necessarily a necessity moving forward as well. So we believe the VR headset in the consumer space, I think professionally is very much a different market. But in the consumer space, we believe it sits somewhere between the two. So we're looking, in 3 years, over 30 million sales, which by anyone's standards in a CE market which is increasingly commoditized, increasingly I suppose simplified by the smartphone and the tablet. They're pretty decent numbers which we're predicting. So we're indicating there that there is continued growth. We're indicating as well that there will be a kicker in the market, and I think it was Richard before indicated that I think 2017. I think initially it was 2016, now it's 2017, which is batten down the hatches. Be prepared for the long haul. Be prepared that this year the returns may not necessarily be there, or certainly may not be there in a critical and large proportion as well. So what we've been looking at really at the moment in some of our latest reporting is what we believe will be that step change in VR, and what will take it to that next level on the hardware side. I think critically, and we're seeing this investment continue, both from the VCs, but also as well from the likes of HTC, Intel, and countless others as well, is that continued tech development as well. More, better quality screens, untethering of those devices, high quality, weight reduction, etc. as well. So as long as we see that continued roadmap of that hardware, we believe that there's a step change coming. The opportunity to try, as I mentioned before, awareness is getting there as well, but I think in the consumer sector there's a requirement now to get these headsets in people's hands, get people trying them as well. And we saw on the first presentation, Kevin indicated that one of the ways to drive that awareness is actually to put this into the public domain, put it into public forums, theme parks, shopping centres, retail, for example, as well, and get people utilising that technology and build the awareness that way. And what I'm going to talk about in a minute as well is that content hook as well. What are the applications, whether it's gaming, whether it's the experiences, whether it's that bridge between gaming and video, still yet to be explored and still yet to be discovered in some instances as well. But it's how do we keep that retention of that consumer coming back time and time again to this headset and not just gathering dust on the shelf. And then finally as well, retailer support. We saw this with smart TVs, we saw this with 3D. Quite often, retailers are often missing the boat with regards to how they educate that consumer when they come through the door. And this isn't just the UK, this is going into the US, into APAC, etc. as well. So having that engagement, having the ability to try and actually use those devices in store, I think will be critical to the adoption. So moving on from hardware, as I say, I think there's effectively a snowball driving, I think, the hardware as well. There's significant investment, right the way across the world on the hardware side. But I think from a content perspective, then what we are seeing, certainly as shown right up front there, the actual numbers on the software side are actually relatively low. But what we are expecting though is over the course of our forecast period running up to the end of the decade, is that we will definitely see continued growth. Now that's not necessarily all going to be consumer spend. As I mentioned, I think advertising will be a major part of VR, and I think some of the demonstrations, I think with Live Light, for example, where you can overlay advertising in real time onto virtual stadiums or into actual stadiums, there is the ability to look at new and different business models as well. And also then on the gaming side, what we've seen from the emergence of mobile is it doesn't necessarily need to be that purchase at the point of actually buying. In-app purchases are actually rocketing that mobile space as well. So I think it's exploring those different business models and finding what makes the consumer sticky will be critical. And just there looking at the segmentation, games is no doubt, certainly on the principles of PSVR wasn't free to buy. You had to buy it, you had to buy the console, and then you had to buy the games. On the video side, when you look at Sky VR, for example, it's giving away free videos. Look at Jean, for example, giving away free videos as well. And rightly so, I think, at the moment, because the awareness in the video sector definitely needs to grow. But I think it's what's going to be that step change in the content side, which, as we believe there, by 2020, video will be catching gaming up in terms of revenue revenue generation. Then, what will be the kickers in that space? So looking at that monetization of content, I think what we believe will be the change and how we see the experimentation moving forward. I think initially, given that there's actually probably a shortage of content, I know if you speak to many producers, they'll argue that there is a lot of hours of 360 and VR content in the marketplace at the moment as well. But but I don't think there's not necessarily enough to start populating channels, etc., and subscription on-demand services as well. So I think it's going to be this big hitter, pay-per-view style content as well. A boxing match, for example, will be prime for this type of billing. And also as well, looking at major franchises and brands as well. Bringing Disney, bringing Star Wars into it as well. There's sufficient Star Wars. I don't know how many, but we're talking hundreds of millions of Star Wars fans who I can guarantee if they're willing to pay £200-300 for a lightsaber that just sits on a plinth, they're going to pay $5-10 to watch something in Star Wars in VR as well. So I think it's that utilising existing brands and franchising will be critical. But then also as well bundling with traditional content as well. So we're starting to see this. Disney have indicated that they're going to be doing it with most of their tentpole titles in the next couple of years, is companion content as well. And The Martian was a prime example of this. Maybe they went overboard with a 40-minute companion piece. But I think using that to promote main features and extending the life of content, I think will be good. And also as well, restricting good and free content as well. As I mentioned, free content is everywhere at the moment with VR as well. So I think limiting that and actually limiting access of consumers and actually making them have to pay, I think will be key. And then also as well, bundling, I think will be prime, but we've already talked about that. Just aware of time, but I think what we can learn, and particularly on the video side, is what's working in the traditional consumer space. So these numbers on the left here aren't just VR. This is the total home video market globally, and how that spend splits across subscriptions. So in subscription is your Amazons and your Netflix and the money coming there, and the buy to own and rent is things like iTunes, for example, as well. But what we are seeing is that consumers are moving away quite rapidly now as well from the ownership to access model as well. So the days when you can start to charge the $10, the $15 for something that a consumer is going to keep are diminishing very, very quickly. Consumers are increasingly influenced by Netflix in that habit now of actually accessing and having the ability to consume as much content as they want for a flat rate as well. And we don't believe in the video space VR will be much different moving forward. I think one of the other main takeaways from this as well, and we're starting to see this already in VR as well, is the repeat usage as well. So it's the episodic content as well, and we're seeing some of the major Hollywood directors, producers, and even actors now starting to come into the VR TV episodic space as well. And we know there's so much money in that VR TV space, sorry, not VR space, but the TV space as well. When you look at how much the likes of Sky, the likes of Netflix, Amazon are investing in TV content as well. So that episodic content we believe to be pretty critical. Sports is the other one, and as we mentioned before, Nick's obviously done a whole presentation on this as well. But I think with VR as well, we don't necessarily need to almost just follow the exact same pattern and the exact same model we've had with traditional video. We can actually, VR provides this platform, and when I say VR, I'm looking at 360 and so effectively CGI VR, is the ability to extend rights, to build new propositions which were previously weren't available as well. So on the left here there, you've got just how the Premiership's effectively broken up its rights. If you actually go to America as well, you can probably triple, quadruple the amount of rights, how they've segmented them, and these guys are pretty savvy at making money. So you can guarantee that in the next round of rights negotiations for the European Championships, for World Cup, for the Premier League, for example, as well, VR isn't broken out at the moment. There's a lot of discussion as it should be, but in the next round of rights, we'll start to see VR being broken out as a strand of rights which people will be bidding for. This is just a soccer example. Sorry, not US audience. This is a football example. But you can imagine this for multiple sports around the world. And as we saw with the show reels before on sports as well, VR and 360 video as well can get to new areas of stadiums, of locker rooms, of the field, which were previously weren't accessible as well. So you can look at pre-post game, extending the life cycle of that game beyond just the 90 minutes as well. So we'll start to see a lot of experimentation there. And I think there was a question before, which was looking at Formula One and the real-time processing required as well. But I suggest you have a look at NASCAR in the US. NASCAR have got a CGI-powered tablet app, which in real time recreates the actual race as it is going round. And you've got the ability to select each individual car. I think it's actually multiple view, average speed, position, etc., etc., etc. And that's a business model they are monetizing at $6 a month or $35, I think, dollars per season. And that's up and running as well. Now that's not VR, okay? But you link this back to how we're talking about esports and how big this is becoming as well. Well, surely the extension of that NASCAR app is to drop that viewer into that car with a headset on. You know that, and you can, and that's just the beginning there. So from there, do you not then extend and say, okay, well, then esports, do you drop someone into Call of Duty, you drop someone into League of Legends, get them sat on the cliff and just watch everything unfold before them as well. And we know, look at esports, $500 business last year, $2 billion by 2020 as well. Massive, they'll fill out stadiums, they'll get, more views than some major football games as well. There's a massive pent-up demand for that type of content and of an audience which are willing to pay for content as well. So esports we believe to be a prime area for this. I'm aware I've not talked about sports much, gaming much as well, but just quickly through some of the stats at you as well. Compatible hardware is already in the marketplace as well, with the PS4 as well. Next year we'll have Xbox coming online as well. By 2020 we believe that around about an attachment rate of a quarter of those consoles will be using VR headsets as well. And the fact that they've actually paid money to buy that headset, they're certainly going to be driving up revenues as well. PCs, I was with NVIDIA a few weeks ago, and they're talking about how they're driving down that price point of the entry-level VR PC. We know it's coming. Laptops are now can power VR pretty comfortably as well, and we believe that will be a marketplace as well. But I think really from an installed base perspective, then it's got to be the smartphone. In terms of that, just looking at closely, we're going to be approaching 2 billion handsets, compatible handsets in the marketplace as well. When you actually start looking at the new ecosystems like Daydream, for example, and what's Apple going to do? Does Apple come into this market and completely revolutionise again? Who knows? But we believe that smartphones will be a key in the installed base sector as well. So in summary, very, very quickly, I apologise I've overrun a bit here as well, is the technology is still growing. As I mentioned as well, this isn't a quick return, a quick a flip on investment here as well. This is a long haul, but we believe there is certainly enough pieces of the jigsaw already in place and enough that are visible that this this market will gain traction as well. As I said before, in terms of the applications, then let's keep on discovering what works and importantly what doesn't work and learn from the mistakes. The investment and commitments there as well, and importantly we're starting to see that more and more now on the content and on the software side as well. There's so much money in that hardware side as well. But we've seen some big VCs starting to throw millions of pounds at the content producers. User experiences at lower costs. We're looking at next generation mobile handsets. We're looking at the untethered experiences as well. Those will certainly improve, in terms of resolution, in terms of weight, in terms of just the actual content that's available on those as well. So I think the lower costs will certainly drive up adoption. And finally as well, greater education. It's time to get that message out there, from a retailer perspective, from people like Sky endorsing it and pushing it through traditional platforms as well. But yeah, I think there's certainly enough in the marketplace as well. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
You can cope with one question?
One
I think we've got
question's
time
fine.
for one.
Yeah,
if anyone's got one. Or did you give a completely flawless talk?
It was that comprehensive that I've done everything.
This means you're going to get mobbed when you go out the door. All right then. Okay, well, thank you again, Carl.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.